the subject is still with us today, but today we don't have just a soloist, Ali Jalali. We're honored to have him, but also two of our former fellows, Sami, who is here to my left, and Farishta, who is we'll hear from shortly, but we also have 8 others in the audience. Each of them a tremendous resource for insights and knowledge on Afghanistan today, and we hope thoughts on how the U.S. should be dealing with this issue. Lest you forget, the Congress of the United States in July established a bipartisan panel with the purpose of a comprehensive review of the entire U.S. involvement in Afghanistan over 20 years. That panel is now beginning its work. And beyond that, if you see the article that just appeared in the National Interest by our friend Talgat Kaliyev from Kazakhstan, he said that the United States should be paying close attention to what the Central Asians are doing in Afghanistan, because it's very relevant at the moment. We're going to hear more on all this. I might also note that our former ambassador Khalilzad has been proposing that the peace deal that was done with the Doha Accords should still be implemented. So there's a lot actually beginning to happen just in recent days, and the timing of this event could not be better. I'd like to begin by introducing again Ali Jalali. The floor is yours, and then we'll hear from our other 3 experts.
Thank you very much, Frank, and thank you for this generous introduction. Our friendship goes back to 30 years, probably more. And when we were attending this Wednesday meetings of CACI's in your office and in your locations, those were very, fruitful days, because we discussed the Central Asia. And after I went to Central Asia to have I was a correspondent for the newsroom and Voice of America from 1993 to 2000. When I toured all these twice a year, I used to stay there 2 months and sending my reports from there. Much was actually enriched by the discussion that you was organizing in the Central Asian Institute. So I appreciate that effort. Now, today, what can we talk about this? I thought that I would talk about 3 issues on this 2nd anniversary of the Taliban return to power. The 3 issues is how Taliban see themselves and how they look at themselves. And today they are celebrating this 2nd anniversary, which is sustainable for them. And the second is how others looked at them, the region and also the beyond the region. And finally, some thoughts about the outlook. I don't know how long I have, maybe.
We'll stop you.
Hopefully not after 5 minutes. I'm taking 15 minutes, but 15 minutes of Kabul time. Because 5 minutes is for introduction. Anyway, during the past 2 years that the movement has established control over the country, but failed to operate as an effective and responsible government, or gain domestic or international legitimacy. The country is now internationally isolated, Afghanistan, never been isolated. Economically is in a crisis, although some stability is reported about the economy of the country, and socio-politically is divided. The situation, reminiscence of the Taliban's brutal rule in the late 1990s, which I covered at that time for the Voice of America, but in a changed context. What is this context that makes it different? There are a number of factors that shapes this new context. First, it is the transformation of the Afghan society during the past 2 decades. And this means different dynamics of control is needed for any government. It's no longer the people of the 1990s, but an educated society and a more aware society of so many things that we want. The second is the pomposity of the movement, which is based on its pretension of defeating a superpower. The Taliban at all levels show pride and confidence, seeing that they defeated the US. Sometimes they added not to it, making them more defiant to external influence. And the third is absence of serious challenge to the Taliban at this time, in the inside and outside the country. There are some armed resistance, but it is a nascent resistance and not very broad-based. And outside political opposition resistance, in fact, either fragmented or they are run by people who lost credit and credibility for the people. So they're fragmented. And then finally, the change in geopolitical. There is no Iran, Russia, and India to support the resistance now. There's no strong, kind of intention of the international community to again make a very, in a serious stride politically and militarily into Afghanistan, and it has been particularly announced by many countries. So these four things shapes the nuclear that make them confident. Now, most of all these factors have amplified the ideological, political, and ethnic power of the supreme leader. Sometimes we talk ideology of the Taliban, but it is a mixture of ideology. It mixes the political power, political competition, and also tribal. It is ideological, political, and tribal. It's not only ideological. So within that system, you have the people, Western Taliban, Eastern Taliban, modern Taliban, hardline Taliban, and all shades. But the trick is that with all these differences, if they do not stick together, they will dissolve. All of them will lose. So this is some kind of a. Now let's how they go. Like all ideological movements, a revolutionary movement, others, when they come to power through military victory, they become authoritarian. Because first of all, they have consolidated their power there. They don't trust people. People don't trust them. And then in order to stave off any kind of real or perceptive threats to them, they actually go to strict control. Strict control through repression, through surveillance, to spying, to prosecution, to like Taliban flogging and other things. So this is something which is typical not to Taliban, to all movements who have come to power through military action at the beginning, at least. Sometimes they change, but at least they become an authoritarian regime. So they cannot afford to lose control, to moderate their position. So this is the nature of that kind of decay. And now, in order to justify their control, they take legitimacy not from the people, from God. This is the divine right of the Amir. And when Amir says something, that's actually the word of God. How they interpret it, that's a different thing. During the past 20 years, they have shaped the culture and mentality of their fighters to be something like what they are now. Women's education is haram, women work is a haram, and you have to pray. In other words, the mullahs or the Taliban are helping people to get to a free ticket to Jannah, to paradise. So they are taking this world from them in order to give them the other world. So this is what they now. The trust deficit between the vectors in the unsatisfied population is created an environment of fear, suspicion, and mistrust. And they cannot easily lose control in order to respond to the demands of the international community. Domestic and international efforts, including UN, OIC, others, try to encourage them to respect the rules that in other Islamic world it is common, but there's no results. But the issue is not only ideology, also control, political control, although the initial economic collapse has averted, the humanitarian crisis continues into this year. It's even more serious because only 25% of the international donor contribution has been dispersed so far. For this year, I think it was demanded $3.3 billion, but only $700 billion has been dispersed. So this is the solution. The people in Afghanistan are too busy with their daily life and poverty that to stand up to the tyranny of the Taliban. Now, how are the relations in the region? While no country has recognized the Taliban government, Kabul increasingly look outward to build a positive image and sees international recognition as an entitlement, not in a privilege. We said we won the war, we established control over the people, we have an ideology, we have supporting Islam, you're helping people to be good Muslims. So these are entitlement. So it's entitlement in this economy. And publicly, the Taliban government claims the control of the country, honors the Doha Agreement, and would not allow violent extremist groups to attack other nations from Afghan territory. But concerns that the Taliban-ruled Afghanistan is this, that the region looks at it and the world looks at it, that it's again a breeding ground for terrorism worries that everybody there. Now, we are talking about Al-Qaeda in some countries that the Taliban market themselves as a counterbalance or counter, power against the Daesh or ISIS, Khorasan, which is a brutal organization. However, for people of Afghanistan, what is the difference between Daesh and Taliban at this time? If Daesh is bad, how about Taliban? And fighting Daesh is an ideology. So we have to present an alternative. Alternative is actually without cooperation of people who will partly believe that Daesh is bad and Taliban are good. Unless you have that trust, that kind of conviction among the people, it's impossible that the Daesh will be defeated by Taliban if you attack here and there. They are everywhere. Afghanistan, they go to Kashmir, they go to Pakistan. Well, Al-Qaeda the same. Al-Qaeda leaders have already paid allegiance to the Taliban leader. That allegiance has not been cancelled. And according to some reports, some Al-Qaeda members are within the government of Taliban. So it is the outside world, despite all these differences, China, Russia, Pakistan, Iran, yes, nobody can dare to recognize this group as a legitimate government, despite the fact that they have other differences. Because there are so many serious issues associated. Now, the major concern is that whether the Taliban have the intention, if they have the intention, they have the capability, not a physical military capability, but also cultural, ideological, and political capability, political capital in order to, fight the extremist groups in Afghanistan, or not allow them to use Afghanistan territory to attack others. Those extremist groups in Afghanistan, they do not target Afghanistan, they target the neighboring countries. They target China, they target Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, they target Iran, Pakistan now. So they are there. As long as are there, long ago when they doing the Doha conference, when Taliban came under pressure that you have to get ties with these groups, they would issue only a affidavits signed by some of these groups. Okay, well, we are not going to use Afghanistan. These affidavits meant nothing. The only group that did not sign this affidavit was Al Qaeda. It did not. So this is all very cosmetic things. And so therefore, no country actually is willing to give them this. Now, how about Taliban? Do they care? As long as they have engagement with the neighboring country, the neighboring countries are forced to engage Taliban for two very vital interests. One is security, to stave off the operation of the extremist groups with their territory, and they are using Taliban or giving a kind of a what they call it, maybe they are asking Taliban to help them about this, and maybe good relation with Taliban will provide them some security from this group. The other one is trade and economic relations. Today, Pakistan and Iran, the major market is in Afghanistan, while other markets are shrinking. Iran is a major market in Afghanistan. I think in the past 6 months, some reports is $2 billion. Pakistan the same way. So what does it mean for Taliban? They mean, okay, on the one hand, they have these engagement. On the other hand, demands to respond to for the recognition. What is the cost of recognition to them? The risk of responding to these calls in order to get legitimacy outweighs the risk of their power. Because if they widen the base of the government, other group through some mechanism, elections, some mechanism, some international kind of a project. So other groups will count, they lose power. When they actually moderate their policies toward women, other Afghans, and they lose control. The only weapon that they have now is fear and force and control. And on the other hand, they cannot afford to kick out all the extremist groups of Afghanistan. They are part of them. They will be fighting together all the time. So at the time, they believe that they can weather the storm of not being recognized by the international community. However, some thoughts about the outlook, and then we'll stop and shut. Most Afghans believe that the solution should come through peaceful talks and peaceful settlement. Those who do not want to go to Afghanistan, they take a very hard line. Those who want to go to Afghanistan, their position is soft. Now, how is it possible? Only it is possible. Well, also some friends in the United States also say that the Doha process should be resumed. But how is it possible? There are three conditions that it can make it possible. First, Taliban under the pressure to agree to talk. Now they don't agree. They are not ready to engage in talks with other groups. Because they say, okay, we welcome people here, it's amnesty, but they should be under us. They should be allegiance to us. Something like the Republic was saying to Taliban long ago. The golden surrender or something like that. They are like that. In order to convince them, they need some pressure. That pressure is there, but fragmented. The regional countries are not in a position to pressure Taliban. Taliban's families are in Pakistan. They move freely. They have committed crimes against humanity. Nobody is prosecuting them. And their money is outside the country. Their families are in Europe and in the United States and other things. And also the regional countries, they have accepted 12 of their 12 embassies, their diplomats. So what do they want? Unless these change, this pressure to make them ready to talk to other side, then who to talk? The second one is that currently, as I referred to this earlier briefly, currently the Afghans opposition, they are who are wherever they are fragmented. They do not speak with one voice. When they do not speak with one voice, the Afghans, the Taliban, or the international don't take them seriously. Unless they're a unified front, a credible front that people in Afghanistan trusted, and also the international community can support them, then the other side is not there. And third is that unified policies. The General Secretary of the UN Secretary General tried 2 months ago in Doha, brought together the special envoys of these countries for Afghanistan. If he could achieve a kind of a unified position toward Taliban. It failed. And now United Nations is trying, there is some movement going on, I don't know how serious, going on to once again actually convene that kind of a meeting in Doha in order to bring some kind of a international unity in the approach to Taliban. That's a third thing. If that does not happen, these two other elements is not going to work together. I will stop here, and I'm sure that I took more time than I deserve. But thank you very much for your patience and your attention.
Thank you very much, Ali Jalali. We now turn to Farishta Sahi, who is a former and a member of our CACI network, and is here in Washington, director at Freedom House of their work on Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stark. Good afternoon, everyone. It's indeed a great pleasure for me to share this space with distinguished Professor Mr. Ahmed Ali Jalali, with Scott Warden, and our fellow Mr. Sami Mahdi. Thank you, Central Asia and Caucasus Institute and Rumsfeld Foundation for organizing today's panel discussion. It is important for many of us, especially for Afghan fellows here, that the story of Afghanistan is not forgotten, and it needs attention, and it needs to rethink and reconvene. So thank you very much for organizing this session. Thank you all for joining us, especially in this rainy day, and those who are online joining us. My remarks today will focus mostly on the human rights situation in Afghanistan, as we are here sitting and discussing the second somber anniversary of fall of Kabul in August 15, 2021. Unfortunately, Afghanistan continues to experience a human rights and humanitarian crisis, and urgent action is needed to revert a further deterioration of the situation. The situation of many Afghans remain extremely unpredictable and uncertain, living under the oppressive rule of Taliban. And for those who have tried to seek safety outside of Afghanistan, their situation is even extremely worse and dire. Thank you, Professor Jalali, for setting up the context and briefing all of us about what is the difference between Taliban takeover from this time and from the time when they took the control of power in Kabul in 90s. I think one of the major things, it's a huge difference, and the situation is even worse this time, because this time Taliban reversed all the gains which were made in the last 20 years by spending millions of dollars and spending a lot of human lives in achieving some of those major pillars or major institutions or structures which were very, very fundamental for a government based on the principles of democracy and human rights. Unfortunately, we have lost all those gains. All structures, starting from Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission to the Ministry of Women's Affairs, to all civil society organizations where they had no other option than to close down their organization or reshuffle their activities from human rights to provide only humanitarian affairs to survive in that context. We have also seen that those gains, whether it was in terms of youth empowerment for a brighter future for Afghanistan or connecting Afghanistan to this new world, they're kind of all disappeared in a matter of few days. And it's so unfortunate, and for an Afghan and for a human rights defender from Afghanistan who worked 20 years for promotion of democracy, human rights, and women's rights, I think it's a very sad moment for me speaking about losing all those gains of last 20 years. The Taliban seizure of one of the reports, according to the Freedom in the World report, Afghanistan is marked not free, both in the year 2022 and 2023. Taliban have demonstrated that they have no respect for international commitments, for the commitments they made in Doha for an inclusive government and respecting the norms, the international norms. They have definitely, despite, they have violated all their promises, especially the promise of giving amnesty to all. We all have observed, and there are several reports that solidify the fact that after takeover of Kabul, they started systematically targeting all the former military and security forces. They also started targeting the ethnic and religious minorities. I think we all here, we know that according to several reports, especially the Human Rights Watch report, it's clear that Taliban continue to unlawfully and arbitrarily arrest and kill ethnic and religious minorities. There are many, many edicts, as USIP has documented all those edicts. There are many atrocious and arbitrary edicts that has systematically sidelined and silenced women from all public spaces. We all know that an entire population of young girls, women, teachers, educators are now imprisoned inside their homes. This generation it's taking a high mental toll on all those girls who couldn't attend this school in the last 2 years. A huge population of all teachers, they're still inside their homes without any clear vision or path for future or any hope for future. I think this, and Taliban has done it very, very strategically, and they have done it on a very gradual and systematic manner. So, for example, first they started refraining girls from education, and then they started giving more edicts and issuing more edicts to further sideline or imprison women. Over the past 20 years, I'll just read a few of these edicts. One of they have banned and restricted women and girls from work, livelihood opportunities, free movement, and access to public spaces and services. Women have been barred from working in the international NGOs and UN offices. We have few cases of women who are still working with the UN agencies, but they are working remotely from their homes, and they are unable to join in person. And we also know that this has a great impact on delivery of aid to the most vulnerable population, especially women in the remote areas, children in the remote areas. I think this has hugely impacted provision of those services and aid to those communities. We have also noticed that Taliban edicts have refrained or restricted women movements. It's so unfortunate that women cannot travel alone. They have to be accompanied by a mahram or escort. All the driving, women are not allowed to go and get the driving license. Women are also not allowed to listen to music in the wedding halls. These are the new edicts. They cannot go to the parks alone with their kids. They even cannot go to the beauty salons. I know this may sound very less important issue, but according to Al Jazeera, the beauty salons are only the last resort for women in Afghanistan to socialize and to earn income. And according to BBC, when they interviewed people, some of the colleagues from Afghanistan Chamber of Commerce, 12,000 beauty salons overall Afghanistan are shut down, and these beauty salons were mainly run by women or female-headed family members, by widows. It means that these old women are no more bringing income to their families, and Taliban are continuously pushing them towards poverty, destitution, and more sufferings. There are also reports from inside Afghanistan that Taliban are recruiting young kids or young boys from schools and further indoctrinating them with harsh, ultra-conservative interpretation of Sharia law. And they're going back, and they are the Islamic police to their families to further ostracize and further push their female family members into this imprisoned laws or imprisoned notion or norms or values which they believe as Islamic values. Unfortunately, the situation is so worse that the UN Human Rights Council, which published a report in 2023 June, the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Afghanistan and the UN Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls stated that Taliban treatment of Taliban treatment of women and girls may amount to gender persecution, a crime against humanity, and it can be characterized as gender apartheid. Unfortunately, Taliban have also tried to punish those who stood against them. We are working with a group of women protesters, with a group of human rights defenders. Unfortunately, they have been tortured, especially the women protesters. We had hundreds of women who came on the streets, especially in Kabul, in Western Afghanistan. They were imprisoned, tortured, raped, and their families were tortured, and all their documents, including their passports, were destroyed by Taliban. And many of them are either in hiding inside Afghanistan, or they have tried to seek refuge outside without any promise of final resettlement and protection. Unfortunately, Taliban have also systematically tried to attack or detain the men human rights defenders. We have very clear case of education rights defender Matiullah Bisa, who was arbitrarily arrested and detained on 27 March 2023, and Rasul Parsi, a university lecturer and Islamic scholar who spoke against those edicts. Taliban continue. At Freedom House, we had an assessment of human rights situation in Afghanistan, and according to 663 survey respondents, all human rights defenders, 98%, 92% of them reported that they have faced some kind of torture, harassment by the Taliban. This is a huge number. So you can imagine that the civic space inside Afghanistan has completely disappeared. There are many, many cases that goes without being reported or without being documented, unfortunately. We have, and these all issues are also compounded by the economic crisis in Afghanistan. I'll just read some of the data here from the world leading agencies. 97% of the population is currently living in poverty, which is compared to 2020, it is 47%. It used to be 47, and now it's 97%. According to UN figures, 28.8 million people, more than half of the country's population, needs humanitarian assistance to survive, while 3.2 million children and 800,000 pregnant and breastfeeding women are malnourished. The Taliban's ban on women humanitarian staff from working in non-governmental organizations, UN, has denied effective support to those who are in desperate need. According to UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, the series of restrictions levied on women is exacerbating existing vulnerabilities faced by women and girls, as well as women-headed households. OCHA found that 48% of women-headed households have poor consumption score, food consumption score, compared to 39% of male-headed households. Even food is not reaching to women. And that's why the world is trying, especially the UN and other organizations are trying to put it as a case of gender apartheid. There's also, we have been hearing in many policy circles, the Taliban have maintained the fiscal policies, there is stability economically in the country, they are very good in revenue, tax collection. Unfortunately, these are not translated to micro level. These macro level figures are not being translated or implicated in the micro level. And in the micro level, people are at the verge or Afghanistan at the brink of humanitarian crisis. And that's one of the major reasons for seeking refuge in the neighboring countries. According to UNHCR, 3.5 million people after the fall of Kabul are internally displaced. 2.5 million people registered. These are only the registered cases, and you can understand how many unregistered cases have sought refuge in Pakistan, Iran, Central Asia, and Turkey. Is the situation good for those who have sought refuge in these countries? No, because those countries, especially, we all know that Pakistan, Iran, and those countries, first, they have their own set of issues which they are dealing. Secondly, they were not prepared for this influx of refugees. Thirdly, there were not regulatory processes that were prepared by UNHCR or other countries to accept these huge amount of human movement. That's why this is considered one of the largest immigration or one of the largest refugee crises. Unfortunately, especially as we are working closely with human rights defenders, the situation of human rights defenders remain extremely dire in these countries. They are faced by police harassment. They are faced by lots of fines from the government agencies because they are unable to do the registration. Their financial resources are shrinking because countries are only providing one-time emergency support for human rights defenders, and the second round is not promised. Many of human rights defenders initially were promised, because of this chaotic evacuation efforts, a promise for the safe pathways, but unfortunately, they're still stuck in Pakistan without, and other Central Asia countries without processes. So as we can discuss more about all these atrocities, but just for the sake of timing, I'll just come for a few recommendations. In terms of the human rights crisis in Afghanistan, one of the things which we have been every day, like we hear from human rights defenders on call, we hear that do not recognize Taliban. The Taliban should be pressured to end violations and repression and be held accountable for their alleged crimes under international law, including investigation of whether the crimes against humanity of gender persecution against women and girls has been committed. The voices of people in Afghanistan and those who have been forced to leave the country must be heard in their calls to end the grave rights violation and for justice and accountability. The international community should be more consistent and effective in their response to Taliban's violation, including pushing urgently for an end to violent reprisals and the release of those currently held arbitrarily in Taliban's detention. The international community should also heed demand for a more robust accountability mechanism for investigation and evidence collection regarding human rights violation, and renewing and strengthening the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan with additional resources to maintain scrutiny on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan. For those Afghans in transit or in neighboring countries, government should be more supportive to protect them, including ending deportation and expanding and accelerating programs to resettle vulnerable Afghans to third countries. There is a huge backlog of those who were stuck. And then I will just end with this final remark. We are all hearing that financial aid for Afghanistan is declining. I think we, as Professor Jalali mentioned, and there are many reports mentioned, there is a huge humanitarian crisis. I think these funds should continue to increase and sustain. Thank you so much, and thank you for reminding me of that.
Thank you very much. We're going to turn to Scott Wharton, who has been following these matters very closely from his post as Director of Afghanistan and Central Asia programs at the United States Institute of Peace, very actively so. Scott?
Great. Thank you, Fred. Great to be here with such a distinguished panel and audience. So much has been said about the context. I won't dwell on that because it's been laid out so well. Maybe I can try to surface some of the policy dilemmas that are, I believe, facing the US and really the rest of the international community, particularly the Western allies that were supporting the previous republic. I think that there are three main, let's say, surprises of the Taliban's rule that relate to their overwhelming control at this point in the 2 years since they took over. First is their economic management. I don't want this to be conceived as overweening praise of the Taliban, but it has been surprising, accepting what First just said, it doesn't trickle down, but it has been surprising that the Taliban have increased revenue collection as a percentage of GDP. They've embraced the private sector quite robustly, even if it has limited effect. And by many accounts, corruption in several key areas, particularly trade and transit, is reduced. So their economic management seems to be against predictions at a level that can maintain the status quo, and with all of the abuses, the human rights abuses, and the inequalities that have been laid out, it's providing a level of, let's say, management that is not provoking a mass popular outcry. I'm choosing my words carefully, so it's not that they're doing a good job, but they're doing an adequate job against predictions and their lack of technical capacity that I think is enabling them to continue their rule. The second one is, for me, the Taliban's aggressive foreign as well as domestic policy. But let me just talk about the relations with the neighbors. Here is a weak regime beset by larger neighbors almost all across, including very large ones in China and Pakistan. The foreign policy of the Taliban has been remarkably nationalistic and not accommodating of even Pakistan, which hosted them and was really a but-for cause of their victory, which is to say, Pakistan was essential for the Taliban's victory and survival in the insurgency. Yet they support the TTP, which is a grave threat to Pakistan. If you kind of go around the borders, Iran, which has had a tense relationship for a variety of reasons since the Taliban's first coming to power, they have an aggressive water policy in terms of building dams that constrain a vital resource for Iran, as well as persecution of Shia minorities, amongst others. If you go to Central Asia, maybe it's a more accommodating relationship. Uzbekistan has tried to lean in and have a more normal relationship without recognition. But still, there are cross-border attacks by different terrorist groups that the Taliban have at least failed to control, if not encouraged. When it comes to China, they still are supporting, by many accounts, a certain number of East Turkestan Islamist movement, ETIM fighters, maybe not verified, but also if you look at China's multi-billion-dollar investments in the Belt and Road Initiative in Pakistan, the TTP support is really threatening a major interest of China in the region. So wow, and then, of course, as well laid out by Farishta, and tragically, the human rights abuses at home, which include, many political groups, ethnic groups that the region has supported and cares about. So with all of that, how is a weak power, behaving so aggressively to its neighbors? You would think that it would be seeking some kind of accommodation because you have the universal, I'd say, outrage and opposition of the West. Anyway, that's remarkable. The third key factor that I think is surprising is the weakness of the political opposition. So, of course, the Taliban have a number of advantages. They won by force. They can behave, as Dr. Jalali laid out very well. They can behave as an authoritarian ruler. But there are such overwhelmingly common interests amongst the non-Taliban groups, which I believe are a huge majority of the Afghan population. I'm not talking about people that political figures maybe that were in the Ghani government per se, but if you look at the political groupings around Afghanistan, so many of them are hurt by Taliban rule in one way or another, and some gravely hurt, and all women, which is more than half the population. Still, there has been, from, I would say, an international perspective, if I can offer that as an international, there's been a lot of infighting and competition over getting Western support or attention diplomatically versus coming up with common platforms and being united. And with such a tragic turn of events, that's partly understandable, but I'm just offering it as an impediment. The Taliban kind of have an easier ride because there's no unified opposition in any form, and that gives them a bit of a free pass. So, against all of these factors, I think what we are, I hate to say it, looking at here is a longer term stalemate and perpetuation of Taliban rule than many would have expected. Certainly, I don't know if I'm on the record, I hope not, but thinking, okay, 6 months after they took over, they're ill prepared, and then it was a year, now it's 2 years, and unfortunately, because of all the factors that we've laid out, but I would say, we're looking at a much longer time period and a more entrenched Taliban rule than was expected and would be hoped for. That said, I guess I outlined the aggressive foreign policy as well as domestic abuses as maybe the final surprise that culminates in all this is nobody has recognized them. I mean, this is also remarkable. Even of course during the Taliban's first destructive rule, there were a handful of countries that recognized them, and nobody has so far. So that's also a testament, and I think as Richard said, maybe something to build on, or at least maintain, is the international unity to say, for all of these reasons, take your pick. Different nations have different priorities, but it's unacceptable to be ruling the way the Taliban have. So it's basically evidence of a remarkable approach to governance that is offensive to so many groups, and that is at least a source of unity that should be maintained and held on to. I think that the dilemma for the U.S. policy is how to deal with this long-term, suboptimal, let's say, destructive status quo. The option of U.S. force is, I think, off the table for a long time. It's politically untenable, and obviously it had disastrous effects, I'd say, for a lot of Afghans in terms of just overall conflict, and it didn't achieve it. So taking that off the table, how to deal with this. I have some, it's a somber day, but I have maybe, more cold water in this regard. I look not as a historian, but just at comparative examples of where has the U.S. faced a defeat like this against a regime that is fundamentally opposed to U.S. interests in many ways. If we look at Vietnam, that has similarities, of course, in terms of U.S. defeat. And it was about, I think, 20 years of isolation in Vietnam until we re-engaged. It's a different political context, of course. It was Cold War. But just throwing that out there, that isolation is an option, and it's frequently resorted to by the U.S. foreign policy establishment, which is, I'd say, in a bipartisan way. If we look at Iran, okay, there's a different circumstance, but with some common elements in terms of Islamic fundamentalism. It has been 45 years since we broke off relations and haven't had any kind of normalized engagement, heavy sanctions regimes, and so forth. If you look at North Korea, it's 60 years, different context, but still, there is a precedent, I hate to say, of long-term isolation and sanctions, which, while they might avoid, and I think this is why they are politically enduring, they might avoid kind of acute risks for U.S. core national security interests of failure in the short term or drastic events in the short term. But over the long term, they haven't benefited the people of those respective countries. And there are certainly arguments that change would have transformed more quickly if there was more engagement. So I throw that out there as examples, and I think we can all look at others, Myanmar, Somalia, Yemen, where in the face of horrible abuses that are happening internally and a politically a lack of good political options, maintaining a bad status quo has endured. And I would think, certainly I know for this room, but I think for American foreign policy as well, there's an imperative to try to figure out, okay, well, how can we avoid that kind of long-term negative outcome and trying to have a transformation faster, and I would say peacefully. And I say that out of conviction, but also because I work for the U.S. Institute of Peace. So I think the question, therefore, is what type and level of engagement with the Taliban and with Afghan political opposition groups offers the best hope to avoid a long-term isolated and suboptimal status quo. I'll just throw out some ideas and then I'll stop. I mean, I think that we have a fundamental problem of engagement, certainly the international community, I think the UN as well, in terms of not being able to reach the real decision makers and affect their choices, which is to say Hibatullah and an inner circle in Kandahar. It sounds from me that a lot of diplomatic conversations that happen with ministers in Kabul, with the foreign minister most recently, there were some international meetings. I won't say that they are agreeing with Western and international and a lot of Afghan positions, but there's a willingness to engage and have constructive debate, but they're not the decision makers, and it's very difficult. There's this kind of you're talking to people that might privately agree, and yet they can't influence their own leadership. So I don't have a solution for that, but I want to at least call it out. I think that what I'll conclude with is it's useful to think about what are pathways, viable pathways toward a more inclusive system of government over, I don't know, the medium term, say 5 years, not immediately because the Taliban are in such control. It has to be a stair-step approach. Is it hoping for a Taliban collapse? As I said, I think that there is a case to be made for that being wishful thinking, in terms of their minimal service delivery to have an enduring presence. Is it defeat? Again, I'm not advocating for that, but I think that there is, certainly even the armed opposition has not shown very many results, and I don't think there's an appetite, not just from the West, but from the region to intervene in that way, and I think it would be quite destructive. Is it internal moderation? Is it debates within the Taliban to say, okay, we're going in the wrong direction, we're not helping the Afghan people? I think we've seen some statements by folks that we would not really call moderate that wind up getting marginalized even within the Taliban movement. But that's a question mark. And is it external? To what extent is it external unity of the opposition? And I think we had some good points about that, particularly from Dr. Jalali. This is just a range, it's a spectrum. It's not either or, but I think that's where the debate and the focus and strategic planning for, I would say, the international community, and a question for this audience, at least in the room, for Afghan groups that are not with the Taliban, to see what is that right mixture and how to work constructively on a path, and hopefully together, international community and Afghan political groups to force change, or to incentivize change sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. We now turn to a genuine expert on Afghan media. He's done it on the spot, and he's doing it today as editor-in-chief of Amud TV, Sami Mahdi. He is also a former fellow of our institute, and a Rumsfeld fellow, and a member of the Kamka network actively.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Starr, and everyone here. I'm pleased to be here. I think everything has been said. Nothing much left to me, but I think as a journalist, I should turn to the people and reflect what the people of Afghanistan have to say. Tragically, this is the second anniversary of fall of Afghanistan in the hands of the Taliban. And today we posted on TV platforms, online platforms, just a question, simple question from our people, that how the past 2 years have changed or impacted your life. We used to have this kind of questions for our audiences when we were in Afghanistan at home. But this time, something struck us a lot. There were many comments people were saying from within the country that please don't ask these questions on online platforms because it's not safe for us to answer this question. We have never had such kind of feeling in Afghanistan in the past 21 years, since the fall of Taliban. I think that says a lot about the mood of the country and the mood of the nation. What we have been going through, what the people are going through. Dr. Jalali gave a wonderful, perspective of what's happening in the region in Afghanistan, and also we heard from Farishta and Scott. I will give you some numbers and examples from media and freedom of expression, to contribute to this discussion, wonderful discussion. In the past 2 years, we have lost 500 media outlets. Over 80% of female journalists have lost their jobs. Over 60% of male journalists have lost their jobs. We have over 250 cases of violence, abduction, and torture of journalists, including 8 people being held, detained by the Taliban just in the past week, including 4 of my colleagues who are working for Army. We had 9 other colleagues in Taliban's detention for 5 months for no reason but doing their jobs as journalists. The Taliban have started a strategy of intimidation domestically, for the region, and internationally. That's what I see. I think very similar to their first rhyme, they have tried to intimidate the public and rule the country through intimidation and fear. That's why you see, for implementing CACI in Farah, the entire cabinet of Taliban, including those who are called moderate or changed Taliban, take a flight, go to Farah to just watch the scene of killing a man. Because that, shows and sends a wave of intimidation and fear across the country. They have intimidated Uzbekistan, everyone knows. They are intimidating Iran, everyone knows. Now they're intimidating their patrons in Pakistan by TTP. Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, everybody is paying bribe. And they are intimidating United States and other international stakeholders by the fear of Daesh and ISIS harassment in the country. It looks like Taliban are the only player on the ground who has a comprehensive strategy for today and tomorrow of this country. I don't see any comprehensive strategy by the political opponents of the Taliban, former leaders of the government or cabinet members or anyone, including the Jabhat Muqawamah, resistance front. I don't see a comprehensive strategy by the region. Yes, there is a strategy as far as a reporter I can see from the United States, justification of the Doha deal and justification of the withdrawal. But Taliban have a comprehensive strategy for the country. The base of that strategy is social engineering of the country. 40 million people. They have started building new jihadi madrasas in every single district of the country, including over 100 madrasa in 1 year, just in Tahar. What that means for the country. And they're not ordinary madrasas that we used to have for over a million, 1,000 years. They are, they call it jihadi madrasas. Jihadi madrasas. These jihadi madrasas are set to promote the Taliban ideology and their interpretation of Sharia. We have like thousands of madrasas in Pakistan, and the entire region was burning in hell. Now, Afghanistan is going to be a much bigger ground for breeding these madrasas and these jihadi talibs in the coming decades. So, building new jihadi madrasas is one pillar. Censorship of media, or maybe I should say, employing the media to their own interests and benefits is the second pillar. The third pillar is ethnocentric governance and policies, all questioning them. And this is not my words, it's the UN's words. And the fourth is tribal interpretation of this. Taliban are set to do, a widespread social engineering of the country. I'm afraid that means threat to the future of my country, to the future of region, and the future of international community, especially the United States. I see that my country is forgotten again, especially by the United States. Sending millions of dollars to Afghanistan under the Taliban doesn't mean that the United States is really engaging with the people of Afghanistan. We all know that Taliban have registered over 1,000 NGOs in the past years. So a big bunch of these amounts go to the pockets of the Taliban, to the Afghan network and others. Who is controlling? There are no free media. There is no civil society. There is no real diplomatic presence of the international community. That being said, I think the real partner of the international community, especially the United States, in that country is the people of our country. All surveys, research, and numbers show Taliban do not enjoy over 15% of public support. Not by Afghan research institutions, not by former government institutions, but by international, very credible institutions, including the Asia Foundation surveys that they did every year for Afghanistan. They do not enjoy over 15% support for from the population. I think the international community has a partner in the new generation of Afghans who truly believe in democracy, in the values of democracy, human rights, women's rights, freedom of expression. But this partnership was never utilized, unfortunately. It was always underutilized because during the past 20 years, the United States, had, certain partners in the country. Now it has chose to partner with the Taliban to fight back another terrorist group. Dr. Jalali asked, what's the difference between Taliban and Daesh? Really, for ordinary people. There is only one difference, I think. Taliban are the teachers of Daesh. Daesh learned a lot from the Taliban. This was Taliban who persecuted and killed, a kind of act of genocide against minorities, especially against Hazaras and Shias in Afghanistan. It was Taliban who abolished our Buddhas of Bamyan. Then Daesh learned it in Syria and Iraq. We know that. We know that it's not a news for us or in the international community. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Well, these are very sobering and well-grounded reports. I would like to underscore what seems to me a real conundrum and complexity here, and that is, on the one hand, from Sami and Farishta, we've heard very, very grim reports based on reality, not on some fantasies or reading journals or something like that, but on real stuff. And on the other hand, we're hearing about, well, a certain accommodation that's taking place in many parts of the international world. I just mentioned that, for example, there was a conference in Tashkent a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, in which the Taliban was very, very present with a delegation of 20, 25 people. And there were the foreign ministers of close to 60 countries. Now, we can say no one recognizes them. That's not really the case, because most of those 60 countries, in fact, have sent chargés d'affaires who have received them in return. They function exactly as ambassadors. So I think this is a reality. And those attending included China, included Russia, included all the neighbors in the region, included Iran, included Pakistan, India, you name it. So that is a reality. And beyond that, I mean, just the other day, Kazakhstan announced that it has done this year $1 billion worth of trade with Afghanistan and hopes to raise that to $3 billion next year. All the other neighbors are doing the same. And then meanwhile, there's a combined effort to return to the air railroad through Afghanistan that would get you to the warm waters and to India and Southeast Asia. That project is going forward through very close interaction with the Ministry of Railroads and so on in Kabul. So you have these two realities. And thank you, Scott, for highlighting the conundrum that we face. How do we relate the two? And how, when you all call for some deeper attention to this, how do you do it? So the floor is open to all of you in this very, very competent audience. Sir, you must introduce yourself. Stan. Come up front.
My question is very easy.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah, my member of Afghan network. I have to speak in the mic like this.
No, you don't have to.
Just speak like that.
Just speak.
Just be brief. Just be brief.
My question is easy from Scott, that you said about the good management of economy. In the number of you said that it is there is 97% is under poverty, and when a person by gun go to in front of a shop and made the shopkeeper and get the money by gun, by force. It is a good management for taking for taking the money from the people as the
Taxes.
tax.
Taxation, what a representation.
Yeah, and second question is
No, only one.
yeah.
Sorry.
One is small, very small question.
Very
Sorry. You said that there is not a unified, opposition. Just I want to say about the, not about all opposition, about the opposition that came in the US. We are about 87,000 people that we came here. There is member of government, there is political elites, there is media leaders and civil society members. We had many meetings, many gatherings here. One gathering more than 1,500, another two gathering more than 200. And now we see the monthly meeting that we have a monthly meeting, as I requested you that we need a table to start this monthly meeting. And
Your question.
yeah, just finish. We started this, we went to the Department of State and I came to you and requested we want we need a table, Weekly we are sending $14 million to the Taliban. But we cannot find within 2 years a table. I educated and the government was backed by the US.
Okay.
All of us. We cannot find a table to start our meeting. So we started. Anyway, we started. We are unified.
I'm sorry.
So we want to talk. We don't want to change anything. We want to talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, please.
Hello to everyone. Hello to everyone. Thank you for doing this. So my question is from Mr. Jalali. And first of all, I'm super angry with this idea about the aid that Taliban gave from the Taliban. And the second question is from Dr. Safi. So the first question is, how do you say or how do you believe that Taliban has different ideology in themselves? For example, I'm from Herat City. Taliban founded around 800 madrasas and they brought 80,000 people around Afghanistan to these madrasas to like jihadi schools. So if you know Afghanistan geography, Herat is like a little bit modern city compared to another part of Afghanistan. And this founded by the Herati Taliban. So how do you believe that Taliban have different ideology like
Good.
So the second.
No, one question each. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And the rest of you, when you come up, turn around so people watching on
Please.
video can see.
Thank you. I think I misspoken about this ideology. In Afghanistan, unfortunately, no ideology escaped fragmentation on the basis of ethnicity, on the basis of social, position of people. And you have ideology in the past. You have leftist ideologies, and they were split into other fractions. Yeah, you had Islamic ideology. Also, they were disintegrated into ethnic fractions. For Taliban, I think when I said that the power of the supreme leader or the leadership is not only ideology, it's political and also tribal. Look at the Hibatullah. Hibatullah is very different from Mullah Omar and Mullah Mansour, because Hibatullah is an educated Islamist kind of a jurist, we call it, or Sheikh al-Hadith call it, whatever. He believes that he knows more in religious term and fiqh and kalam than other people. So that's his religious credentials. On the other hand, politically, he claims that he sent his son for as suicide bomber against Americans. So he has a credential, political credential. And then he belongs to a very large tribe in Zayis, with allies with the Zayis. Now who? Mullah Omar belonged to Hutak tribe, a small Zaid tribe in Kandahar and Kalat. Mansour was part of Isaac Zayis, which is also a small tribe. Mullah Omar was a religious mullah, while Mansour was a businessman mostly. So therefore, his power is ideological, political, and tribal. He used this. That's what the power now moves from Kabul toward Kandahar. And he is trying to concept because he knows that there are different opinion in Kabul. But the moment he actually gives them some kind of space, and he otherwise, and Afghanistan always they said Rabal Mashriqayn, Rabal Maghribayn. Mashriqayn and Maghribayn is still there. So this is what I said. I agree with you that different ideology, they believe in the same norms, and but politically they have the source of power.
Very quick challenge to you, sir, from one of our online viewers. What do you mean by isolation when you say that when you say Taliban are isolated? They have had at least 744 diplomatic meetings in 72 countries in 2 years.
Yes, they are. It's not because they are not isolated. They do not have embassies in all these countries. Nobody can invest in Afghanistan the way they've been in the past. And also there are restrictions on their movement. Is this isolation or not? Maybe some countries just for one thing I have to because earlier Scott very clearly discussed something. No country will base their policy against their national interests. You are talking about the United States. I think you also complained about it. Afghanistan has never been an important issue in the 100 years of the United States policy. Its position was also marginal. Therefore, the same thing goes for Pakistan. The same goes to Iran. Same goes to they are trying to base their approach with Taliban on the basis of their own interests. And good, yeah, Scott.
Well, just want to address the economic question. I mean, I tried to choose my words carefully. Maybe they weren't careful enough. I'm not calling it a good economy. I'm saying it's minimally adequate to avoid state collapse. I mean, that is very different from a positive label, but still, it is enabled them to consolidate power in a way that I think was unexpected. So I want to clarify that. The other thing I would just maybe echo or expand upon the point in terms of isolation, engagement. I mean, I use that word, but I think it needs further definition. I think it's a real problem if having a meeting, often I think the content of the meeting is to criticize the Taliban, at least from the US and from some of the neighbors. I would challenge those who use that as a metric of quasi-recognition to flip it around and say, what is the theory of change that leads to Taliban significantly altering their policies when nobody's talking to them? I mean, I just don't see that as a real form of pressure, even though it might be emotionally satisfying. But I think, for moving ahead in the medium term against the significant obstacles, I would say, how does not talking to them get them to say in a period of months or years, oh, okay, we're going to change fundamentally how we run things.
First, can you respond to that issue?
Yes, I think
Are you prepared to talk or should you?
I'm just prepared to talk about because there is a lot of discussion on whether to engage or not engage, and if you're engaging, on which terms to engage. In the past, there has been a lot of serious cases of human rights violation inside Afghanistan. and discussing, for example, with Office of Richard Bennett and many others, there was a need to at least speak about those arrests, arbitrary arrests, and to provide some kind of mechanism for protection of those who are left at large inside Afghanistan. So this kind of like engagement with Taliban to pressure them to provide protection for the people who are at imminent risk is very, very different than, you know, engaging them on a very political level, power sharing and other stuff. So this is just an addition.
Sir,
Yes, my name is, I put on my radio voice, so I'll be loud. Everybody here, including the audience over there. My name is Zafar Hashimi.
you're not visible to the audience.
My voice is better.
No, they want.
All right, who can insist with you? Zafar Hashimi, U.S. Inspector General, advisor for known as SIGAR, but here speaking as a camp fellow. Couple of points and then questions on the economic management. I think one has to distinguish what the Taliban are delivering, and basically they are not delivering what services are expected from a government. UN is doing the functions of service delivery for Afghanistan. That is paying the teacher salaries, paying the Ministry of Health salaries, and all other functions of the government is done through the United Nations. What the Taliban are doing, to their credit, they have been collecting revenue very well, but no one knows what actually they are doing with that money. And it's just for their own purposes, for promoting their own agenda. So that distinction has to be made whenever we're talking about delivery of services as well as collection of revenue.
So the UN, in effect, is creating the conditions that enable the Taliban to create 290 madrasas.
And that takes me, yes, and that is taking me to my second point.
Yes.
You talked about the eighth conundrum in Afghanistan.
Yes.
You know, what are the options for the US? You know, when you're sending money, there are the questions, you know, very credible questions about, you know, diversion of aid and different ways that the Taliban are benefiting from by, you know, manipulating the list and providing aid to their own soldiers and whatnot. That's part of it. But the other part is, you know, the legal way of the Taliban benefiting and taking money out of the aid that goes into Afghanistan. All the implementing partners, all the NGOs have to have their stuff. They have to rent places, they have to pay taxes, they have to pay registration and license fee and all of that, which are just helping the Taliban in many, many ways. And that's all I want.
Can we also ask question from?
Please.
Yes, because you're working with SIGAR.
I'm not talking on from my cigar hat, so
Okay.
I can talk as an individual and a Rumsfeld fellow.
Okay, so just, whatever information you have in terms of corruption, how Taliban are doing? Are they doing better in terms of reduction of, you know, corruption, control of corruption? Because we have been hearing a lot of cases from human rights groups that they still take a lot of money from people for passports, for all those services. So what are the real like figures, the facts?
I can't give you the figures, but to Sami's point, censorship, you know, and with censorship goes this culture of impunity. Over the past 2 years, you have not seen a single reputable Taliban commander being indicted for whatever as he has or she has done over the there is this culture of impunity in Afghanistan under the Taliban for the Taliban leadership.
Yeah.
You don't see them prosecuting their own people. Whenever there is a situation, the Taliban commander is the righteous one, and the people who are fighting against them or protesting, they are the wrong ones.
Thank you, sir.
Face that way.
Yes, please.
I'm Ron Bukhari, Senior Director of Eurasian Security and Prosperity at New Lines Institute. Quick question for you all, whoever can answer, would love your thoughts. Afghanistan is a strategic vacuum under the Taliban. Pakistan is in meltdown mode. Iran is changing. The Central Asian states are fearful. Most fearful is Tajikistan. Would love to see how you guys are thinking about how this strategic vacuum can expand strategically? And what does that mean for US national security? Thank you.
That's your department.
Scott, you're on.
Yeah, well, you should probably answer this more than me. No, I think it's a good point, and what Dr. Jalali was saying about US strategic interests, of course, affects the larger geopolitical picture in terms of our strategic competition with China. I think that one of the dilemmas that policymakers have faced in the broader context has been that Pakistan, being nuclear armed, having well over 200 million people, have been on the verge of, has been at various times on the verge of collapse itself, which represents a grave security risk as well. So it's the Al-Qaeda terrorism risk in Afghanistan as against risk of Pakistan collapse. Those are both large interests that the security establishment seeks to balance in the foreign policy establishment. So it's basically to answer your question by saying, yes, I think that is a significant concern. Certainly US engagement with Central Asia, I think has achieved, right? You can opine on this in the historical context, but it's been on an upswing for this very reason. I think there is a lot of interest in shoring up our relations and our military support in terms of Central Asia with that goal in mind.
Let me, from my own personal experience, in the past decades, I've been part of the track 2 talks with China and also with Russia. US, Russia, US, China, and we are under the Chatham rule. Yes,
Yes.
My remarks that represent my own personal opinion. In those years, both China and Russia, well, China and Russia changed a little bit later on, that they were very much willing to see the United States in Afghanistan, not to leave Afghanistan. China used to say that we do things differently. We are not familiar with the things that you should do. Therefore, don't ask us, don't expect us to do the same thing that you are doing. But we also want the stability in Afghanistan. And one of the elements of stability is the presence of the NATO, United States, and Afghanistan. However, they were helping Afghanistan with the Logar copper mine, as long as the 10th Mountain Division was providing security there, and Japanese was paying for the police.
Yes.
When that was gone, so therefore I heard.
But they still own INOC.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And now, with the later on, I think they like to do heavy lifting somebody else. But now it's the opposite. They should do the heavy lifting, while the US should support. Heavy lifting is now the baby of these countries: China, Russia, Central Asia, Pakistan, India. US can help, or NATO can help, but heavy lifting time is gone.
Thank you. I have here a question from an old friend of Afghanistan, former Congressman Don Ritter, who asks anyone, what about a government in exile supported by the West? I asked anyone in.
There's no support for that.
I can.
Go ahead.
I can tell you something that I heard, that at the very beginning of collapse, some of our diplomats who are still in our embassies across the world, they were thinking something like that: a government in exile by diplomats of Afghanistan, the former government or the republic. But I don't know. Amrullah Saleh also calls himself the acting president of Afghanistan. But I think maybe that opportunity was gone for the time being, or I don't know. I just reported that.
Anyone want to speak more positively on this subject? Or that's very striking. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we could continue for a long time, and I have a suggestion I'd like to make after a brief comment. And that is, what is striking me, listening to this really extraordinary session with an ideal assembly of speakers, is how little analysis and for that matter, even discussion you hear on this issue in Washington today. And that's serious, because absent analysis, absent discussion, there's obviously not even seriously focused debate. Now, maybe the congressional commission that's charged with looking into the last 20 years will give rise to that, but it won't produce a report for a year. And it will be retrospective rather than prospective. So it doesn't really address the issue at hand. And that is, what kind of engagement, if any, is appropriate for the United States in the coming years and decades? And this is an important question. And whether we treat it in the short term or in the long term, it's a vitally important question. And action, inaction is a form of action. So whichever way you go on this, yeah, it has very concrete and specific consequences. That being the case, I'm sitting here in great admiration, not only for our speakers who are old and honored friends, but all of you in the large audience here today, the American Foreign Policy Council. I'm wondering if we shouldn't do this maybe every 6 weeks and try to engage a much broader range of people. Try to engage people who have been in the government, people who are just citizens, members of Congress, congressional staffs, journalists who've been there. A lot of journalists who have been in and out of Afghanistan. They have views on that. In other words, if we were to convene this way every 6 weeks, and for the kind of discussion we've had today, but with a clearer focus on the future. Where do you go from here? What type of engagement, if any, should the United States pursue, and how do you do it? It's one thing to say that we're against something, and it's quite a different matter to say that we have an actual process by which we think the situation there can be alleviated. So I just close with that and thank you all for attending, and thanks to our online audience for staying with us today. We will resume this discussion before long, but meanwhile, the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute's forum program will continue very actively in a few weeks. Thank you very much.